Thank you very much for joining us this morning for this workshop session about structuring your community energy project in a just and inclusive way. This is a workshop led by ourselves at Regen, Scottish Power Energy Networks and Community Energy Scotland. And throughout this session, we're going to try and make a bit of sense of what we mean by a just transition, what it means to make a project inclusive, and work through some practical ways that we can do this in our projects going forward. It's not a session that's meant to drum up loads of insights from yourselves that will then go and inform recommendations for Scottish Power to go and do something with after the fact. It's really about making sense of this idea with some practical cases, some practical examples, and working together so that we have useful insights to take away into the good work that everyone does. I'm Fraser. I'll be the chair for the session today. I work for Regen. We're a non-profit sort of consultancy, advocacy, think tank type organisation. I lead our Just Transition and Communities work. In a previous life, I was a founding director of Glasgow Community Energy, which was 2 solar and schools projects in 2 relatively deprived areas of the city. And I sit on Scottish Government's fuel poverty panel as well. Joining me from Regen, we have Robbie Evans and Grace Millman. We also have Victoria Mackay from Community Energy Scotland, who's going to talk us through some cases of where projects are doing this particularly well and some of the considerations you have to make when doing this in projects. And we have Louise Taylor and Liam Cantwell from Scottish Power Energy Networks. You'll hear from Louise in just a bit. Liam will be in the breakout rooms facilitating and helping with the discussions. In terms of the agenda, we have, that looks scarier than it actually is, but we have some good content packed in. So we're outlining our intro aims now. We'll then have a presentation from myself about how community energy can and does support a just transition already. This will be really trying to get to grips with the concept itself and the ways that it plays out. We'll then have a breakout room, which is fairly informal, trying to work through what it actually means to us and how it's playing out in different projects that we're working on. And then we'll hear from Victoria, Community Energy Scotland, with some good case studies of where this is working already. We'll have a bit of a break because that will be quite a lot of information to digest. And then we're going to move into 2 breakout sessions for the remainder of the workshop. These are scenario based. So rather than just a workshop where we discuss things a little bit and maybe suggest what we think the right answer or the solution is, I'll present to you a couple of scenarios of hypothetical projects in hypothetical towns and cities. And we'll work through collectively a bit of a strategy, a bit of an action plan for how we deliver different bits of that project in a fair and inclusive way. And I'll give you all the details on that when we come to it in about an hour's time. Kicking off then are the aims of the session. We want to understand together what we mean by a just transition, I think first and foremost, and also community energy's role within that. We want to hear about how different projects have embedded it. And when I say different projects, I mean the projects that you represent and the organisations that you work with, as well as the projects that we'll talk through in the various presentations. We'll work through some of these practical examples to make sense of the concepts in reality. And ideally, some of you won't have met each other, so it's a good chance to network and make some partnerships. Does that all sound all right? Excellent. In which case, I'll hand over to Louise from Scottish Power Energy Networks for an intro.
Hey, thanks, Fraser. So good morning, everyone. So I'm Louise Taylor and I'm the Community Energy Engagement Manager for the SPM licence area here at SP Energy Networks. So I just want to start by thanking you all for coming along today. I hope you find the discussions valuable and that you leave today with some good ideas, insights and resources that you can take back to your own communities. So if we can go on to the next slide, please, Fraser. So I just wanted to give you a bit of a quick update of where we are as SP Energy Networks in terms of our community energy work. So one of the most important pieces of work that we're doing right now is updating our community energy strategy for 25-26. So this document is our roadmap for the next year. It sets out how we continue to support community groups who want to take forward energy projects and connect to the grid. So the new strategy will be published in the coming weeks and it's going to cover practical support, outlining the tools and resources we're making available to help groups develop projects. And we're going to be looking at the learnings from the last 12 months, reflecting on the successes and challenges from the last year so we can keep improving. So this strategy, it's not a static document. It's intended to be a living framework. We're continuing to adapt it as we get feedback from our community groups and as the energy landscape changes. We can move to the next slide, please. So supporting our community groups. We know that it's important to support and strengthen community groups. In the past, we've delivered workshops. We are the headline sponsors of the State of the Sector report, and we produce regional State of the Sector report for both of our licensed areas. For these activities, we've built partnerships and remain committed to active engagement within the sector. Building on this foundation, we are now collaborating with Regen to produce a new series of case studies. These case studies will be available on our website soon, and they're designed to share the real-world experiences of community groups who've already developed projects and are connected to the grid. This will highlight both the successes and the challenges so that everyone can learn from them. It's going to provide practical insights and inspiration for groups who may be at the early stage of the journey. So we've been looking at different types of community projects so that the case studies cover a broad spectrum of experiences. And the idea of this is by capturing the diversity, we can show that there isn't just one right way to do it, to community energy. Instead, there are many different models that you can work on depending on the local context. So these case studies will sit along other resources, like a bit of a toolkit of knowledge and experiences that groups can draw on when planning and structuring their own projects. So guidance documents, this is another area that we're looking at. We all know that community groups often face very specific challenges when developing projects. And that's why we've been working on creating a suite of guidance documents designed to directly address the areas where we know support is most needed. One of the biggest challenges that we keep hearing about again and again is getting connected to the grid. The process can feel complex, technical, and sometimes overwhelming. So we're currently focusing on producing a complete guide on getting connected. This guide will walk groups step by step through the process, explaining all the terminology, outlining costs and timelines, and set out what you can expect at each stage. Alongside this, we've already published our Community Energy Guide for Flexibility, which helps groups explore how they can engage with flexibility services. So we're also working on other guides, including solar, to help groups understand the opportunities and challenges of community-led solar projects. But most importantly, we are always open to feedback. If there are any other areas where you think a guide would be valuable, we want to hear from you. These documents are being developed to meet your needs, so your input is crucial. Next slide, please. So another key area that we are looking at is improving our website, so it's more of a useful hub for community energy groups. So we've been working on navigation and accessibility, so making sure information is easier to find, clearer, and written in a plain language. We've got a case study section, so we've recently uploaded some new videos of case studies from England, Wales, and Scotland. And again, each one is designed to show how different communities approach their projects, the challenges they face, and the solutions they developed. We want to look at having a resource library, and this will be expanded with all of our guides on flexibility, solar and connections, plus any future materials that are developed. We're looking at practical tools. We're going to be exploring how we can have things like templates, checklists, and frequently asked questions to make the site more action-focused rather than just information-based. Feedback opportunities. We want the website to evolve based on your needs. The goal for this website is to be a go-to place for all of your community groups, whether you're starting your first project or scaling up existing ones. So if you can just move to the last slide, please, Fraser. So to just summarise, we are currently refreshing our community energy strategy just to set out clear actions for the year ahead. We're building more practical resources, guides, case studies and tools, and we're making our website more accessible and a useful hub for community groups. So if anyone wants any more information or you'd like to suggest any future resources, please do get in touch. And I'll now hand you back over to Fraser, who will take us forward with the next part of today's session. Thank you.
Thanks, Louise. So you're going to hear from me for the next 15 minutes or so, and then we will have a discussion. Don't worry, I appreciate it's a lot of information. But what we really wanted to do here was try and lay the groundwork, I suppose, so that everyone's on a bit of a shared understanding of what we mean when we talk about something like a just transition and community energy's role in it. Because the just transition is generally a very abstract concept. Depending on who you talk to, it means very different things, to the point where some might argue it's become meaningless, but we think there are some core components to it. So we'll do a very, very, very quick history lesson on this. So the idea of a just transition, the concept itself, the term, first came out of the 1990s, the COP movements, the big United Nations climate meeting movement. It was about green jobs. So as we transition from fossil fuels to renewables, how do we make sure that the workforce don't go off the cliff edge like they did with coal? That's the root of the just transition phrase as we understand it. But the idea itself, the concept of making sure that nobody's left behind, making sure that benefits are and costs are distributed fairly, goes way, way back to the environmental justice movement. So pop quiz, who knows why in the UK, in most cities, wealthier parts are in the west and poorer parts are in the east? Any takers? Leo, go on.
I think I might be wrong with this. It's something to do with the factory smoke blowing in one direction, and it tended to be that wealthier people wanted to live away from the smoke heading into their neighbourhood, and poorer people were left with the houses that unfortunately did have that smoke pollution.
That's exactly it. Exactly it. Well done. Gold star. Gold star to Louise in the chat as well. So it's entirely to do with the wind. So it wasn't something that we understood quite as well at that time, but as you're building these factories, you realise the smog is all going from west to east with the prevailing wind in the UK. So you build your house outside of that. That's an inequality or an injustice that we see still play out today. So in most cities in the UK, it's still very much that in the east of a city, you'll have higher pockets of deprivation, of fuel poverty, of health issues, lower incomes, etc., versus the west. That's where that initially takes hold. But in this day and age, the idea of a just transition is much more all-encompassing. So it started off with the environmental side. It became very focused on jobs in the 90s and the 2000s. But it's now about all of the things that we're doing to decarbonise in the UK, the transitioning from gas boilers to heat pumps, from diesel and petrol to electric cars, etc., making sure that that's done in a fair way. So some of the big obvious examples of how that's playing out just now are fuel poverty, cost of living. When the energy crisis hit, it was people who were struggling with their bills already that were hit the hardest and are still being hit the hardest with high bills, debt, arrears, health issues, etc. They're also the people who can't easily afford, whatever, 11 grand to buy a heat pump outright or to take out PCP on an electric vehicle. So the people most at risk of being excluded or left out of the transition overall. As climate impacts accelerate, storms, floods, extreme heat, that all impacts people generally in lower income communities more heavily than in more affluent communities because they tend to live in poorer quality housing, not well insulated from extreme weather events and closer to floodplains, as lots of research has shown. And then we have the workers' points as well. So that's the concept. That's the sort of broad idea where it comes from. What I wanted to do now was a quick question to yourselves on Menti. So if you've got a browser open, head to menti.com and pop in the code at the top of the screen, 29535140. This is the only online thing anyone is going to have to do. What I want you to pop in there, 2 or 3 words, is what does a just transition mean to you? Trying to pin down the concept. It's menti.com, code 29535140. You can see a load of people filling in. Perfect. There we go. And that's the big one, equality. Inclusive, great. And the others coming through. Perfect. These are all the words we would expect to see. Affordable, great. This is really good. Thanks, everyone. A few more. Seems like a lot of agreement on the big ones there. Considered. That's an interesting word. Does everybody want to come off mute and expand on that one? Considered. Accessible. Brilliant. Caring. That's a good range. Intersectional. Now we're getting into it. Brilliant. 1 or 2 more. We're waiting to come through, and then I'll just move us on. Community, of course. Good. Thanks, everyone. That actually kind of goes against the point that I was making at the start, that it's very abstract. There's quite a lot of agreement on the core principles. But what we'll do for the rest of sort of the next 5 to 7 minutes or so is we'll step through sort of the different ways that a just transition plays out within community energy projects. We do have a working definition as well. This is Regen's working definition, I should say. It's not Scottish Power's, Energy Scotland's. This is Regen's, but it's one that we try and use to guide the work that we do and the conversations that we have in this space. So the way that we define it is a net zero transition that seeks not just to avoid making poverty or inequality worse, but tackles them head on as a driving priority of that transition, maximising the opportunities and the value to create a better future for all. Gets a little bit fluffy towards the end, but the idea being that you recognise that some people aren't able to participate or have been penalised under the current energy system and in the wider economy, wider society, and doing what we can to make sure that they're firmly at the table as we deliver this transition in all of our projects, policies and initiatives. So community energy has a really rich legacy of supporting a just transition, particularly the last 15 years or so, but really since its inception. The obvious principle here is that it democratises ownership and profits and revenues from energy assets, right? So rather than it being something that goes out to shareholders, private developers, it's something that is captured and maximised within a local community for local needs. Community energy projects also, in our experience and in a lot of the research that we've done, tend to be very good at engaging with lots of different members of a community, bringing people into the fold who might not ordinarily care particularly about energy or think about energy in the way that we think about it when you're trying to do a project like this. And also in recent years, particularly through the energy crisis, revenues have been used from community energy really as critical infrastructure to support people struggling with their bills. The example that always springs to mind is Plymouth Energy Community reached 11,000 households from 2021 to 2023 alone with fuel poverty support when bills first spiked. However, not every community energy project is necessarily fair or inclusive or just. And it's not always malicious that it's not that way, but there are some key areas of projects and some key things that we can do to make sure that this is embedded in all the work that we do in community energy projects. A lot of this work guided what we did at Glasgow Community Energy, which kicked off way back in 2017 and is still running and generating healthily today. But when we did a big pocket of research with Scottish Government a couple of years ago on this topic, we identified 4 main areas of community energy projects where you can do just transition stuff, where you can make things more or less inclusive. These are on the right-hand side of the screen. The participation and engagement, ownership and governance, finance and funding, and benefits and beneficiaries. And I'll just skim through each of these individually now. So participation and engagement. If we want to have an inclusive project, a fairer project, we want to make sure that the engagement we do is meaningful. We're actually listening to people and taking on board what they say. We want to make sure it's proactive, that we're reaching out to folk that we think we need to hear from in a community to represent different parts of that community. And we want to make sure that it happens from an early stage and throughout the lifetime of a project, so that everything that we do within the project and the benefit that it distributes, etc., is all informed by community need from lots of different people within those communities. The challenge is, without having a wide range of voices, and now from experience doing a few projects in the past, I know this isn't easy stuff to do, but without getting a wide range of voices within this, there is a risk that you miss the needs of lots of different people and you're not maximising the value that your project could realistically deliver. You also might end up butting heads with different parts of the community who aren't sure where this project's come from or what it's doing or why it's needed. So from that perspective, we want to identify the different people within a community. So the different groups, people from different backgrounds, the organisations that maybe represent them, that give us an opportunity to engage and get into different bits of a community. We want to understand through our engagement what a community actually wants or needs for their local community. What are the challenges they see? What are the big ambitions? That piece sort of being led by community need and community interest isn't something that I'm sure I need to tell most people on this call, but it's something that is very often missed in energy style projects. So grounding it in what a community wants or needs, and then making sure that we're reaching different parts of the community using different methods and approaches. On the right-hand side of the screen, this is consistent for the next 3 slides. There's a bit of practical advice. Again, not just pulled out of my backside or pulled out of our brains at Regen, but based on work we've done with dozens of projects around the country. Some practical advice for being more inclusive in our participation engagement is, 1, to go where people are, engaging in existing spaces at events, schools, local gathering points, but then adding to that using different engagement methods. It's very tempting to just do community centre style or town hall style meetings But there will be a lot of people, particularly people who don't know an awful lot about energy through no fault of their own, who are less comfortable in a collective setting and speaking up. So maybe finding ways to talk to those parts of a community one-to-one, where they can still have an opportunity to be heard. But making sure that we're using different methods that lend themselves to getting different people involved. Engaging early and often, we've covered off. Partnering with trusted organisations. So, for example, fuel poverty charities, faith organisations. In my neck of the woods, I'm in Forfar, just outside Dundee. So in my neck of the woods, it's sports clubs are very much the hub of community activity. So when we're trying to get our shared ownership project off the ground just now, those are the real links into the community that way. And then we have being transparent, making sure that, and it speaks to that meaningful point, making sure that we're clear on, okay, we're not just engaging you so we can say we've engaged you, making sure it's clear, the information that you receive from different people in the community, how that's used and implemented. We then have ownership and governance. This is something that community energy generally is quite good on, but making sure that how we own our projects, the governance of it, usually a cooperative or a community benefit society, making sure it's democratic, making sure it's accessible, and it's accountable as well, that you don't just have 4 board members that kind of do whatever they want, 2 people turn up to the AGM every year, and that's the level of accountability. Trying to make sure that based on that good engagement you do with local people, with lots of different groups, diverse groups within the local community, that your board and your chief exec are accountable. So more inclusive projects tend to be more democratic. They provide an opportunity for regular input on decision making. So again, not just let's do an AGM, see what people think, and do it again next year, but constantly in discussion with the local community to understand what's going on and what's needed. And there are some practical advice on the right-hand side again. So representation, easy ways to embed sort of fairness or inclusivity in projects are making sure that your community board has representation from different local groups. So maybe has a fuel poverty charity represented there, or maybe has a faith leader represented, or a community organisation that works on food, whatever it might be. Trying to represent the different sections of a community and the different interests of a community. Voting rights, the typical cooperative model. Doesn't matter if you invest £10,000, £1,000 or a quid, you have the same voting rights as a member to make sure that there's no imbalance in terms of who gets to make decisions. Making meetings accessible. So not everyone in your community will be able to make meetings at the same time. So rotating when you hold those meetings, making sure that they're cognizant of, for example, shift patterns. So everyone has an opportunity around that, cognizant of childcare. Don't force people to travel where they have to spend loads of money to get to a meeting, etc. Practical, simple examples that I'm sure you're all cognizant of already. Using plain English, this is a massive pitfall for sort of more inclusive style projects. It's very easy, especially if you're someone developing a community energy project. You're in the weeds of your CapEx and your OpEx. You're in the weeds of your installation, your connection. You've kind of got yourself into this space. It can be difficult to take that step back when you're speaking to the wider community and simplify that and make it accessible and clear. So holding ourselves accountable to make it clear in plain English. And then finally, transparent reporting as well. Just a couple of quick slides to go. You'll be glad to hear. Finance and funding is our penultimate slide. Making sure that we have transparent financial models that don't exclude people from participation based on being able to pay. So projects we know are often funded by community shares. That ultimately means that you do have to pay to have your vote in a membership organisation, a cooperative membership organisation. The challenge is that even with a lower level of payment, so when we did Glasgow Community Energy, the minimum buy-in was £50. That was still too high for someone who, isn't sure they're going to make their rent at the end of the month. So trying to make sure that when we're setting up community share offers, that there are options there, flexible options there, that everyone can still participate. And if they can't afford to invest, they can still be involved within the engagement and the decision making about funding and project activities. Another side of this I wanted to mention is that commercial lending, public grants are a big thing, obviously, but commercial lending is becoming a little bit more common, not fully common on big projects, but more commercial lenders like your Triodos Bank, like your cooperatives are starting to sort of cycle into this space. Triodos have done it for a long time. But working with those types of funders, naturally, they will want return on that investment. They'll want a few % off the top. They'll also have their own agendas, which might conflict with the priorities of your organisation. So making sure that you're able to rectify those or step away from that opportunity and find alternative funding is critical in the interest of your members and of your local community. And it's important as well that governance is clear on that purpose, on the ways to participate and ways to input throughout. Some examples of making sure people can invest if we're doing community shares. Some examples we've heard about are, for instance, a lower minimum investment of £1 shares, eligible potentially to someone on a low income, someone who's been referred via a fuel poverty charity. Might be a good way to identify those people and offer shares so they can get in. We've also heard of people buying in pairs. So a 50 quid buy-in becomes much easier if it's a 25 quid buy-in between the two of you. The bonus of that for the community energy group is also that you have two people there to feed in rather than just one. And something that I haven't seen, Victoria might be able to offer more here, but I haven't seen payment plans. So, spread the cost of that investment over 12 months, for instance. Haven't seen that done, but it's something we've heard suggested as a way to make this more accessible. Final point is then benefits, beneficiaries. So we know that community energy delivers so much more value per megawatt, punches well above its weight than typical commercial projects. Depending on the analysis you read, that's anything from 34 to 100 times the financial return per megawatt for an installed generation project. But when communities, as they are increasingly doing heat retrofit and energy advice, the value of that for the health service, for improving people's well-being in their homes, becomes even bigger. More difficult to quantify, but it becomes bigger. So more just projects, in our experience, more inclusive projects, seek to maximise social and economic value wherever they can, along with the environmental value. But crucially, that's shaped to local need. So I feel like a broken record harping on about engaging throughout a project. But it's one thing to come in and say, we want to do a community solar project and the proceeds will tackle fuel poverty. Objectively, a brilliant thing to do. But it's another thing to understand on the ground, okay, well, what is the housing stock that we're working with? What are the actual problems that people in fuel poverty are experiencing? Is it damp and mould? Is it simply a case of their bills have shot up and they can't afford it? That engagement is crucial to understanding the nuances of any problem so that you can really maximise the value of the work that you're doing as a community energy group with those organisations. But that's purely thinking about community benefit funds. Like we say, there's much wider value on offer here. So a lot of the adjacent parallel activities that community groups do, community energy groups tend to undertake, like fuel poverty advice and support, like climate education and outreach. When you look at examples like Huntly Development Trust and others, creating jobs, regenerating high streets, local businesses, etc., the value on offer is significant. But in our view and our experience, it has to be tailored to what a community actually wants and needs at that moment in time. So practical advice, you'll be unsurprised, engaging to understand local priorities, so working with different citizens and stakeholders to understand those needs and those ambitions to shape the community benefits you deliver. Supporting new applicants, so community benefit funds, generally speaking, you're going to have to write an application form to get any money out of a community benefit fund, but not everyone has the time or the know-how to do that, so making sure that people are supported through that process if they need it to widen the pool of people coming in to community benefit. Ensuring diversity in fund administration. So when you set up a community benefit fund, who decides what money gets spent on? Who reviews the applications? Who tracks and monitors the progress of those applications? All of that is critical to how inclusive your project is. If it's just a group of people who are very, very similar in their thought administering that fund, then you're likely to see outcomes that align with their views or their perspectives, versus if you have a bit more diversity from different parts of the community deciding how that fund is spent, it's likely to go a bit further. The last point I want to make, and then I'll shut up in a bit, is considering a strategic approach. So sometimes we might end up with big community benefit funds if you're doing a big wind or a solar farm or a shared ownership development, where you have quite a lot of money coming in addition, potentially to an existing community benefit fund. In that case, we've seen examples such as the 9cc, I believe they're now the 12cc group in Cumnock in the Doon Valley, where they've collaborated as 9 community councils to more strategically invest community benefit funds into larger scale significant projects like transport infrastructure style stuff, like heat infrastructure style projects, things that are a little bit more ambitious in scale and take a lot more project management, but allow that revenue and the value to spread more widely. So it doesn't necessarily just have to be a pocket, a few people working on a project spending a small fund. If you're doing a more ambitious project or you've got bigger revenues coming down from other places, a more strategic approach can help that go further, informed by people on the ground.
Sure.
So these things all naturally piece together. This is as academic as we'll get in this conversation, but these things all piece together. The key questions really to ask yourself in any project is who has a voice, who gets a say. That is critical to who decides what happens, who gets the experience value, who gets to feel the benefit. Who gets to shape the project and what end? Are you just going in with a project idea and you want to get it passed no matter what? Or are you trying to shape that project in a way that works with and for different members of the community, particularly those less affluent, more likely to be excluded? Who can afford to participate? Who may need additional support? That's a sort of community shares and finance and funding. And then who benefits from the outcomes? And is there a way we can maximise this or ensure this is spread more equitably? That is everything from me on this side. You'll be very glad to hear. I've also included, we'll share the slides after the session. There are a few links here to some frameworks, some toolkits that can help you make some of these decisions and embed some of these in practice. Easy work-throughs, questions to ask, frameworks, checklists, etc. So please do check these out after the fact. Right, what we're going to do now, based on everything that you've just heard, is you're not going to hear from me. We're going to open up to 2 breakout rooms. These will be facilitated by Grace and by Robbie. And we're going to discuss in these breakout rooms, what does it mean to you to do a community energy project in an inclusive or just way? Why is it important to you? And how are you already doing this in your projects or seeing it play out in different projects that you're aware of? These questions will all be available for you in the chat. Oh, sorry, 3 breakout rooms. We've had a few people sneak in under the line there. So you'll be put out into breakout rooms. You'll have these discussion questions in the chat, and the facilitators will step you through, listen in on that discussion for the next 10 minutes or so. Facilitators from the other 2 rooms, anybody want to volunteer just a couple, 3 or 4 insights from the discussion they just had?
I'm happy to, apparently I haven't remuted myself, so I'm happy to crack on. Yeah, we had quite an interesting conversation, actually. There was already a lot of work being done that had just transition principles embedded in it. In the discussion that we were having, we touched a little bit upon, I suppose we moved more to what kind of motivated that and why it's important. And there was, I think it's fair to say maybe this dual sense of kind of a morality, but also just now we were just talking about the interesting case of DNOs, and I suppose that the limits to how much you can prioritize one group or one customer once things get into the connection stage. So there was a discussion about kind of, I suppose, how to enable justice with those restrictions and how that can look in terms of early stage support. And we also had a quick conversation about one of the projects was heavily based in and around Liverpool. And I suppose we had a quick conversation about how motivations for action can also come from the culture of a place and I suppose the awareness of work that's already going on or of needs that are already there and how that can, I suppose, support just transition work as well. I think that's a vaguely fair summary. I might have missed out some bits, but
anything missed, please put it in the chat. I'd like to volunteer insights from our group because I think it flows from the last point you made, Robbie, quite well. We discussed sort of why we view it as important, I think was the core of the conversation. And it got to a really interesting point. So we heard a lot about being in person, being on the ground, engaging with different people, makes things a bit more tangible in the first instance. Linking with other organisations obviously is crucial, but it has an effect of building trust with local people, which for the transition overall, not just for projects, is really, really crucial. It's not always easy, and it's quite resource intensive, but that kind of being able to build trust and hand-holding people through the process to come into projects has been really valuable. But I think a really interesting point that came out towards the end was the more voices we hear from, the more people that are aware of the project and that we're aware of engaging on the project, the bigger the pool of people you can draw on, different skills that people might have to get involved with the project. You might have someone that you didn't know who is great on project management or has an engineering background or an architecture or whatever it might be, that you're only really captured by engaging deliberately quite widely. But it's also really helpful for project sustainability. The more inclusive you are, the more people you bring into the fold, the more folk you have to essentially carry the project forward. And we know that in this space, we often rely on volunteers. Volunteers move in and out, time waxes and wanes with life. So that sustainability point came through strongly as well. Really interesting one. Grace, final insights.
Yeah, thanks, Fraser. Very kind of interesting conversations and similar themes coming out as well. And we had a good mix in our group of people involved in community energy groups that are developing projects, and then people kind of on the other side who are providing that grant funding or who are liaising with councils, advocating for the community. So a range of different perspectives there. And it was clear that in terms of the importance and in terms of what it means to do it in an inclusive way, it was very much about understanding what that community has been through, understanding the kind of culture and the makeup of that community and what is important to them. So we talked a lot about communities that have had stuff done to them in the past or have lost out from previous energy transitions, and we want to kind of redress that and make sure that they're benefiting from this one, or that high energy bills is the thing that matters to that community, and so that's being targeted directly through on-site solar. Another interesting point that came up was that the communities on the ground, a lot of the time it's down to volunteers, it's down to individuals who are passionate and who care, but who are doing really, really important work, whether that's food banks or, whether that's kind of responding to immediate needs on the ground. And they're sometimes too busy or don't have the immediate skills or language. I think we talked a lot about the language to engage with this. And that's actually a barrier to them being able for them to apply for funds or be able to be given that fund. And so actually wanting to try and redress this so it's not just the people who have an energy manager or, in their company or in their community that can win these funds. It's actually people who are on the ground delivering the work, and then they can be supported to build that capacity. So I think we naturally got onto some of the challenges that existed in trying to implement this. But it was clear that it's about that real value sitting at that community level and sitting with individuals within that community. And how do we empower them and enable them to access these things and not put those barriers in place?
Excellent. Thanks, Grace. It was a short discussion, but we got a lot of rich insights out of that. I'm very glad to hear it. The purpose of that being, developing a bit of a shared understanding of what we mean and what it looks like, and crucially why it's important to do anything about. If you have any more thoughts that you didn't hear reflected back from the facilitators, just pop them in the chat. Any more thoughts in general, pop them in there. We're keeping an eye. It'd be great to hear from you. I'm now going to hand over to Victoria at Community Energy Scotland. Let me just get my slides back up on the screen. Who will talk us through some case studies before we then, for the next 10 minutes or so, before we then head from a break.
Okay, thanks, Fraser. It's actually just two case studies. We've only got about 10 minutes or so I didn't want to kind of skim over things too much. So what I've done is I've picked a couple of case studies that I think approach things in a slightly different way, but demonstrate some of the principles and some of the things that we've been talking about that Fraser mentioned in his presentation, and also in the breakout room, some of these ideas that have been coming up. So if you could go to the next slide, Fraser, we'll crack on. My definition of community energy has shrunk slightly in the wash, but that's okay. I think it's probably useful just to be really clear about what we mean by community energy first before we move on. And by that, how we define it at Community Energy Scotland is it's the delivery of community-led renewable energy. And that can be either energy demand reduction projects, or it can be energy supply and generation projects. And one of the key things about that is that they're wholly owned and or controlled by communities, or through partnerships. So they could be part-owned as well. But it's all about having that element of control and ownership, which is really key to the sector in our view. So, we've talked a big bit about the theory behind a just transition and what that looks like and what it means to us. So for this session, I just want to take a quick look, like I say, at two organisations that demonstrate some of those principles in practice. Sometimes there can be a bit of a tendency to focus on a just transition in terms of what needs to be done. And it can be easy to forget that, across the UK, communities are kind of routinely out there delivering services in ways that embody these concepts already, things like fairness, things like inclusivity and democracy, that kind of thing. So, do you want to go to the next slide, Fraser? And we'll take a look at the first organisation that we're going to look at today is an organisation called Greener Kirkcaldy, who are a community-led charity and development trust based in Kirkcaldy in Fife. And they've been active for around 15 years or so now. And they focus on, building community resilience, tackling fuel poverty, and promoting sustainability. And they're actually governed by a volunteer management committee, which is elected from their membership, with anyone in the Kirkcaldy area eligible to become a member. So very much kind of locally managed in that sense. In terms of their services and activities that they deliver, they've got quite a broad scope. They're involved in energy advice, renewable energy development, food-based projects, active travel, and also community engagement. Next slide. So just to look at a little bit about what they do in terms of the activities and the services that they offer, they offer free energy advice across Fife. And I think, that the word free is quite important here, because the fact that it's free means that there's no barriers to access, which is a really important thing and something that's been raised in our discussions. And they do that in the form of home visits, debt and benefit advice, and energy saving support. And they also make a point to focus on vulnerable households, particularly those on low income, the elderly, and also people with health issues who might otherwise have difficulty accessing this type of service. In addition to that, they run a community kitchen, which hosts cooking workshops to help people improve their cooking skills, to encourage them to reduce food waste, and basically just encourage them to eat local seasonal food as well. And most of these activities are supported by a large network of over 100 volunteers. Next slide. So, as you might imagine, delivering these types of services can get quite expensive. They actually own their own building in Kirkcaldy, and it's open 5 days a week to the public. So you can imagine their energy bills are would be pretty high. So in order to reduce the running costs, they actually secured some funding from the National Lottery to improve the energy efficiency of the building, and also to install a solar PV system on the roof, as well as a couple of batteries to store their electricity that they're generating on site, and an EV charge point as well. And they use as much of that electricity generated on site as they can to offset having to buy in electricity from the grid. And that really helps to reduce their fuel bills. And it's also, it's a visual demonstration project. They really encourage local people to come into the building, and you can actually see their batteries within the building itself. I think they're located in one of the community kind of hall areas and one of the gathering areas. So you can actually go in and see these batteries. And there's a wee picture there on the right. You can see, and you can touch them, and you can see kind of how big they are, and they're quite happy to kind of talk locals through what they've done and how it benefits them. And I guess in an effort as well to encourage other organisations to think about installing similar measures. Okay, next slide. So if you look at the impact of what they're doing in their area, and also the impact of what they've done just on their own kind of in their own services and how they deliver their own services, and they estimate that they save around 6.4 tonnes of CO2 emissions each year from the use of electricity that's generated and stored on site, and a little under £2,000 a year saved on their energy bills. These are all slightly out of date, these stats. This is information that I've pulled off from a couple of years back, but it just gives you an idea of roughly the scale of what they're doing and how much they're saving. They're also are estimating around 3,700 households have accessed their energy service in 2022, 2023 over that financial year, which led to around £1.5 million in household savings. So, you know, these are real differences that are that they're making to people's lives and to, you know, to how people are actually managing to pay their bills. And in addition to these more tangible benefits, there's also something to consider as the impact of the volunteering and training opportunities that they offer. These are helping to build skills and confidence within the community as well. So that's a really important thing, because it's often really difficult to measure those kind of benefits. Next slide. Yeah, just very briefly, just to summarise what Greater Kirkcaldy are doing in terms of some of these key kind of dimensions that and elements of a just transition that we've so far discussed. You know, we can see the energy efficiency and advice services, and the fact that they're targeting more marginalised groups. You know, that links directly to these concepts of equity and also reducing barriers to access as well. And you know, just in terms of how they're set up, that, you know, their legal structure and how that prioritises local people and includes them within the decision-making process itself, you know, as a development trust that has local people on their management board. It's bringing those ideas and that breadth of ideas into the decision-making process. And in terms of just, reducing the carbon footprint, using their solar PV and the batteries that they have installed, that's contributing to, you know, environmental sustainability, as well as the energy efficiency and advice services, which is actively promoting behaviour change, which is also really important in terms of the focus that they have on climate action as well. And just finally, just resilience and local benefit is another thing that their services are helping to people to retain money in terms of, you know, savings and saving on fuel bills within the community. And as I briefly mentioned as well, just building those skills and that social capital as well, and just broadly and generally reducing that exposure to higher energy costs, that in today's world is, you know, can be really, really difficult for folk to deal with. Okay, so I'm going to go into the next slide now and just look at a slightly different approach, because Greater Kirkcaldy kind of focus more on delivering services and using the renewable energy assets that they've installed to help reduce the costs in order to allow them to do that. But the next organisation, which is Corwin Electricity Cooperative, who are based in North Wales, operate in a slightly different way, and so less focused on delivery of services, or direct services anyway, and a bit more focused on generating and then distributing income from community-owned renewable energy assets. So they were established in 2015 in North Wales, and they currently own and operate 2 community hydro schemes. The schemes are owned and run by local people, with funds raised via community share offers. And the first share offer raised over £300,000, not £3,000, would be a very small hydro. It raised over £300,000, and roughly over 50% of the shares were bought by people in and around the town of Corwin itself. So it's very much a locally supported initiative. And the revenue that's generated by the hydros is used to support the community, which I'll talk a little bit about, and also to maintain the hydro assets themselves. Okay. So I'm going to link these a little bit to some of the dimensions that Fraser mentioned earlier. So Corwin operate a one-member, one-vote system to ensure fairness, because it doesn't matter, you know, how much you invest. Basically, you know, you have your vote regardless. It's not entirely clear to me kind of what the minimum, I know Fraser talked about a kind of a minimum share kind of value offer. It's not entirely clear to me how much people were required to pay to buy the shares. It's not something that's been well publicised, but certainly it's a one-member, one-vote system. So kind of in an effort to stop people being able to buy into that decision-making process and leaving others out. So they designed the share offer in such a way that the investment would be affordable, though, so that people with, you know, more modest means could participate and purchase shares, which is a really key element to this. They also kind of demonstrate transparent and democratic governance. So because it's entirely funded by members, decisions are made by the membership. It's a cooperative, therefore the members are involved in that decision-making process. Okay, so in terms of what the benefits are and who the beneficiaries are, well, in terms of local ownership, the members of the cooperative, most of which, as I mentioned before, are local residents, they hold the shares, so they ensure that those profits stay within the community rather than going out to, let's say, external developers. If it was to be a commercial development, for example. And the revenue from the sale of electricity is used to set up a community benefit fund, which they have, and that reinvests any surplus in local initiatives. And the members and the shareholders are the ones that decide the type of projects that they want the fund to support. Again, which is really crucial. So it could be anything from environmental projects or general local services, anything really that improves community resilience. And also there's the benefit that, you're reducing reliance on fossil fuels and you've been helping to cut carbon emissions as well, which is always a good thing. Okay, next slide. Again, the project generates clean, renewable electricity, and they also help to raise awareness of climate and energy issues, which is giving local people more knowledge and hands-on involvement in the energy transition. And it's also demonstrating how rural communities can harness natural resources in a sustainable way, which is always a good thing. Next slide. Okay, so in terms of kind of the participation and engagement element of things, they did, some quite extensive early engagement to ensure that the community was on board and also to take into account local views. And that in itself kind of helps to build a bit of local pride, a bit of local identity, the fact that they've been involved in that early kind of development process. The hydro project itself does connect to the area's history of using water power, so that's something that feeds into that, and I think it gets people on board at an early stage and throughout the project itself. And they also crucially continue to host regular community meetings, publish reports, to ensure that, to ensure accountability, to ensure that what they're doing is what the membership want, what the local area wants, and that, everyone's on board with the project and with where that money from that community benefit fund is actually going and how it's helping the local community too. And it shows how small towns and rural areas can have a voice in the energy transition. Okay, so just final slide now, and then I'll shut up for a bit and we can have a short break. But just to clarify and to summarise why these types of projects are important is that, it proves that rural and urban communities can generate their own renewable power, and it keeps all of these kind of financial and social and environmental benefits local, and it's not something that's kind of being extracted, I guess, in a way, by corporations or commercial developers that have no links or knowledge of the local area itself. They embody fairness and ownership, participation, and also benefit sharing, which are key pillars of a just transition. And they act as models, basically, both educational and inspirational as well, for other towns and villages across the UK. And I think it's really important for communities to see what other communities are doing, because, as I say, it's that whole, if they can do it, then why can't we? Which I think is a really important part of what community energy brings in terms of the just transition itself. And I think I'll close there.
Excellent. Thanks very much, Victoria. Some really useful cases. It's good to, I think, illustrate some of the stuff that we're talking about. I appreciate it. It can always feel a bit abstract. So that was very, very helpful. We're now going to go into a break. We're slightly behind. That's my fault, not Victoria's. We're slightly behind because I rambled on for ages at the start. So if we take a break now until 12:15, if everyone can come back, and then we've got our final discussion session where we'll have 2 scenarios that we're going to work through in our breakout rooms again. So just 7 minutes back at 12:15. I think that's us. Okay, let's make a start. Only 45 minutes left. We'll do about two sessions of 15-minute discussions, and then we'll wrap up for the day. So the way that this discussion is going to work is we're going to do it based on scenarios, which I mentioned at the start. So I've written up 2 scenarios. I had to rein in my imagination from creating these hypothetical towns and projects for everyone to work through. But what I've done is put together the first scenario, which you're going to discuss in your breakout rooms in just a minute's time. So the scenario is you're a new community energy group. You're in a very socially and culturally diverse city, but there are high levels of deprivation present. You want to build a community-owned rooftop solar project. You've got a little bit of buy-in from the local authority. They've said you can use some of their buildings to put solar panels up, which is great. They're supportive in principle. And the city that you're in has a lot of sports teams, a lot of faith centres, although attendance at these centres has been dwindling in recent years. So what I want you to do in the groups, in the breakout rooms, is to develop an engagement strategy to make sure that you hear from a broad range of community members from different backgrounds in your local area to make sure that the project is shaped by and meets the needs of these different groups. This slide will be in the chat in your breakout room, so you will be able to see it, have it to hand on screen to shape the discussion. The purpose of this is to take what we've heard about, the different sort of just transition concepts and ideas and the case studies, and try and apply it to this hypothetical situation. So thinking about, okay, we are this project in this diverse city. Who are the different types of people we might need to engage with based on the description that we have? How are we going to go about reaching these different people? What organisations, what networks, what channels are we going to use to reach different people within our local area? What methods are we going to use to engage different members? And how are we going to embed what they tell us into the work that we then go on to do? Does that all sound reasonably straightforward? Excellent. In which case, we're going to open the breakout rooms. We had a couple of people had to run off, so we're going to do 2 breakout rooms. Grace and Robbie will be leading, but the rest of us will be floating around in the background, chipping into the conversation to help steer. We're going to run this for about 15 minutes, and then we'll come back. Very, very good. Grace, I wonder if I can press you for your top lines, the action plan for an inclusive engagement strategy.
Yeah, absolutely. We had some really, really good conversations, and kind of we weren't trying to escape the exam question here, but kind of recognizing that every single community is very unique, and you've given us some points to go off there, but that doesn't allow us to form a complete answer as to what is right for that community. We talked about the role of faith leaders, but also recognized that within communities, different communities, those faith leaders can have different roles and have different reaches. So really needing to understand that. We talked about kind of how to identify those trusted partners, and we talked a lot about some of the suspicion that is within people's minds at the moment, particularly when we think about people who are in fuel poverty or facing these high levels of deprivation. Net zero just feels like a complete different world to them, and trying actually to move away from that language, move away from the outcomes in terms of carbon emissions and net zero, but more about things that matter to them. And in terms of getting out to people, Kate had an amazing line which said, "Never underestimate the power of the school gates." Which, we would go, how do we reach these people? You've got people in those groups, in those faith groups, in those sports groups, which you can absolutely kind of use and leverage those groups. But there's so many people not engaged in those, and actually it is maybe those less formal ways in which people are connected, like dropping children off at school, or, we talked about the solar panels potentially being on schools or being on leisure centres. And so it's going to those places and meeting people there and having those conversations there, rather than trying to do it all through groups that are maybe, or organisations that may be separate. And we also talked about the importance of kind of presenting a firm enough plan that people can have something to feed in on, but then making it really clear where their feedback has been incorporated and influenced going forwards. But kind of a lot of work goes into it at that point. You don't want to bring them in too early when it's all, a bit woolly and, well, we might do this, we might do that. What do you think? And they're going, we don't know. So giving them a bit more of a firm plan to feed in on. But yeah, really, really great conversation.
Excellent. Lots of useful stuff there. Thanks, Grace. I think on the scenarios, my Regen colleagues will tell you this is the kind of thing that I could have procrastinated on and drafted up into a full backstory, but we had to stop somewhere. So thanks for getting some good out of them as well. In terms of the group that Robbie expertly facilitated, I just done a summary, so I'm happy to offer that again here. We very much answered the exam questions, sort of stepped through the process. We opened up on agreed on the core principle that the membership and the participants in the project should look like the community as a kind of a guiding ethos of the work. That then starts with profiling the community and the organisations which exist, a stock take of all the different organisations, where they are and the types of people that they serve, the type of work that they do. We then, recognising that faith centres and sports centres were noted as potential avenues in, we'd start with that, partly to do the initial engagement, but also to identify who we're not reaching through those well-established channels so that we can then develop a bit of a strategy for other groups and organisations in our community profile. We then had an idea of a specific group of stakeholders that we would look to work with, were landlords, housing associations and councils as organisations that run services typically for lower income people within communities, to try and get out to them directly. The initial engagement idea was to sort of set up a stall publicly at these different spaces. So schools being one of them, community centres being another, leisure centres being another, there where people are likely to interact and use the different services as well. And then we also had, I think, a lot of agreement on not just coming in and saying, we want to do this project, what do you think? But rather, we've had this idea, how can it meet the needs or the ambitions of this community? Being willing to change course on your own project if community insight sort of dictates that, but also being transparent and accountable. So one idea that came through in the chat was kind of asked and answered, or you said we did, publicising how community insights have been taken on board to encourage more people to see that their insights are valued and hopefully provide more insights on an ongoing basis through the project. We also talked a little bit about plain English, sensitive communication, making sure that we're not just bogging people down in jargon and acronyms, and tailoring that to different knowledge and expertise. Excellent. Okay, we are close on time. So the next breakout room is going to, I think, let's say run for 13 minutes. So we still have a couple of minutes to sum up and wrap up at the end. Scenario 2 then. Scenario 2 is the other end of the project. We're in a different place this time. Backstory could be fleshed out more. But you're a community energy group that has recently completed an agreement with a big commercial developer to take an ownership share in a local wind farm. The community benefit payment, this would be lovely. The community benefit payment from the project is in the region of £100,000 per year. This is hypothetical. You're based in a small town, 20,000 to 25,000 people. You're sort of semi-rural. You're near a big city. The high street is struggling. There's not an awful lot of local businesses. There aren't many employment opportunities. So all the young people are moving out, going to cities, going to universities, and there are high levels of fuel poverty. What we'd like you to do is develop an approach to delivering this community benefit fund in a way that it reaches different parts of the community and tackles the key social and economic challenges faced in the local area. The steps to consider along this are understanding the priorities of the community, social and economic challenges, how you structure the community benefit fund so that it enables most value. What does it look like? How do you apply to it? How is the money spent? Promoting the community benefit fund so that we can get as many people as possible interested in applying to that fund. Managing the award of community benefit fund applications. Who decides? Who has the big red stamp that says if something gets approved or not, and how do you make sure that's done fairly? And then making sure that you understand the value and the impact that it has. As before, we'll go out into our breakout groups. You're going to be mixed again one last time. We'll do 13 minutes, 12 and a bit minutes in this breakout group, and then we'll convene. Great, thanks everyone. Sorry, a little bit strapped for time, but we made it. Robbie, I wonder if you wanted to summarise from the last group discussion.
Yes, I think it was a really interesting conversation. Actually, we sort of we went quite broad quite quickly. I think we were chatting about the wider strategy of a community benefit fund, and I suppose potentially you sort of drew it into two avenues, Fraser, in terms of defining or determining the priorities of the community, about how you could potentially go quite deep with the engagement early and establish a sort of a shared community vision and a plan for that local area, including, I suppose, issues and problems that they might want to address, but also aspects of the community and the area that they value and want more support around. Versus potentially a sort of a more broader general set of priorities which kind of govern where the fund goes. We also chatted about the possibility of moving kind of away from or structuring the fund so it's more based around multi-year funding, potentially. And I suppose we were just starting to touch on the aspect right at the end there about the potential of the community benefit fund not necessarily needing to be competitive if it's not already being used to its entirety, and how that could be essentially a way of making it a bit more flexible and a little bit less arduous. In terms of methods of reaching out to people, I think we discussed a few different things. And I suppose I actually don't know how much time we have. We don't have those time, so maybe I'll stop there.
We will, it's what to say, we will circulate the notes of just the
Yes.
feedback from these discussions, anonymised to everyone, so you can see what the other group said. Great, thanks, Robbie. And then Grace to round us out.
Yeah, I'll be quick 'cause we focused a lot on the setting up of the fund and the kind of the application to it and stuff. So we talked a lot about participatory budgets and having a locally elected board to be able to provide that diversity and that representation of kind of the needs of the community. And that would drive it kind of throughout the process to make sure we were always making those decisions with the community at the heart of it. We also talked about not being too prescriptive within the criteria, so not letting our own views on what the fund might do or fund or enable, but actually being open and led by the applications we get. We had some good conversations about how you make that application process as kind of accessible as possible, and had a really good suggestion around holding orientation sessions beforehand to actually sit in person with people and talk it through, so that they are able to kind of put in the highest quality bids, and that they're not, we talked about sometimes they'll limit their funding because they're worried about, their project being, too big or whatever, but actually you have that conversation, you go, no, actually we want to fund those things. It allows for that. And then we talked about kind of embedding in the local community, in the local area, to understand local place plans and what you were saying, Robbie, about visions for this, and then being able to use that as a marker of impact if we're delivering against those things. So yeah, very, very strong on the kind of representation and governance, and making the most of that kind of large amount of funding.
Excellent, thanks, Grace. So some quite sort of strong distinctions between those approaches as well, whereas I think the first felt much more driven by early, robust, sort of rounded engagement, set the priorities, and that guides the fund, versus something that's a little less prescriptive, but still, I guess, similar in terms of being rooted in wider ambitions of a place. Excellent. I'm sorry it was so crammed at the last session, but we got there. Thank you very much, everyone, for coming along and participating so enthusiastically. We appreciate it an awful lot. In terms of next steps, there isn't like we said, this isn't to inform recommendations for Spain or for anyone else. It was really just to try and get a bit of a shared understanding and work through some of these just transition things in practice together. So we hope for that reason it's been useful to you. There will be a short survey that comes after this, 5 questions, nothing strenuous. How did you feel about format? How did you feel about the content? Is there anything you'd like to see in future sessions, etc.? And Regen will put together just a summary note, really just of the feedback from the group discussions. Nobody will be named, nobody will be appropriated within it, just to give everyone a flavour of what went on and what came through within that. Louise, is there anything closing you'd like to flag from Spain's perspective?
Yeah, first of all, I just want to thank Fraser and the rest of the team for today. It's been really good. And thank you all for attending today. A copy of the slides and a recording of the session will be available on our website. So that'll be coming in the next few days. So I'll email everybody with the links for that. And yeah, thanks again very much. And if anybody wants any further information or help and support, myself and Liam are here to help. Thank you.
Excellent. Great. In that case, without further ado, thank you very much, everyone. Enjoy the rest of your Thursday and have a good weekend when it comes.
Thanks, everyone.
Thanks, everyone.
Bye.
Thanks, bye.
Bye.